Peter Eltsov, Peter Ruggenthaler, thank you very much for coming to UNC Chapel Hill tonight. You're both experts on Russia, and tonight I would like to ask you a few questions about Vladimir Putin, the current president of Russia. Peter Eltsov, what is it like to live in Russia under Putin? You've done that yourself, though you now live in the United States, but what is the perception of Russian people having to live under the reign of Vladimir Putin?
Wow, that's not an easy question, because I think, first of all, I would differentiate between different people. The majority of people, of course, support Putin. And we need to realize that they like him, and even probably in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, where he has a lot of opposition, he still has a lot of support. But what is to live like I think most Russian people have a lot of cynicism now. And even those of them who don't like him, they just try to enjoy life and not to think about politics. I think even a lot of Russian intellectuals today just decided to go along with their lives, that they don't have much influence on political life. So they try to get out of it whatever they can.
Thank you. Peter Ruggenthaler, you are an expert particularly on the Stalin era and Cold War Soviet Union. Are there any continuities when you look at the foreign policy of the Soviet Union and Putin's foreign policy for Russia? Are there any continuities, or do you see a very different scenario?
Actually, as a historian, you always can compare here different eras. Actually, I wouldn't do so. We live in another era, not in the 40s or in the 50s. Regarding building empire, maybe with, I think, it's unnecessary to compare it with Stalin. Actually, today's policy is the answer to the end of the Cold War, of course, bringing back Russia at least on the international arena as an equal partner, face to face to America, and the endless wish by the whole Russian population to be accepted as an equal partner in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. The Ukraine crisis, the annexation of Crimea, led to a severe crisis between the United States and the entire Western world and Russia. Now we have had the Paris attacks only a few days ago, and Russia's involvement in Syria, and of course American and Western involvement in Syria. Are we seeing a new realignment between Russia and the West, and are we seeing or are we overlooking that there still is the Crimean and Ukrainian crisis? Peter Eltsov.
Well, clearly the Russian side is hoping that the West will forget about Crimea, and first of all Crimea, maybe not about eastern Ukraine, but also they're hoping that eastern Ukraine will be forgotten, like the West forgot pretty much about the war in Georgia. And that's what's happening pretty much in Europe today, but I don't think it necessarily will happen in the United States. The position of the United Kingdom will be also different, because I think they're very strong opponent of the Russian imperialism, neo-imperialism. But in Europe, yes, there might be a serious realignment, because some European countries may actually be willing to ally with Putin and to close their eyes on the Ukrainian crisis.
So you are expecting a new realignment?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Peter Ruggenthaler, you are Austrian, and when you look at the relationship between German Chancellor Merkel and Vladimir Putin from an Austrian perspective, is that a better relationship than Putin has with many other world leaders? Is there a particular closeness? After all, Angela Merkel grew up in East Germany, a communist state under Soviet rule, or don't you see much of a difference regarding Putin and other world leaders?
Difficult to answer, but at least to say they understand each other. They don't need any experts who explains them how the other reacts. Yeah, Putin understands Germany, he knows fluently German, he has lived in Germany, worked in Germany. Merkel knows Russia, Russian mentality. So if you compare it, for example, with Obama and Putin or something like this, when Eastern Europe and Russia is something totally unknown, at least until the Ukrainian crisis. So this is at least something the world can count on for the future. That's also a main point why one can be and has to be optimist that things are not going ending in a big war in Europe.
Thank you, granted, but has that apparently better understanding between Merkel and Putin led to any concrete results in reality?
Yes, we could have already a big war in Europe, not only limited on the Ukraine.
And you credit Merkel with not with preventing such a war?
I would see it also from this angle and point of view, that the mechanism of the European Union, the development of bilateral relations also with Russia, that this limits the possibilities of war. I mean, if one could have, if separatists and all these players, in the battlefield would have really free hand, we could have already a much more difficult situation than only this frozen conflict at the moment.
This is a frightening scenario. Peter Eltsov, how do you assess the Merkel-Putin relationship?
I'm not sure I quite agree with the second part of Peter's statement, because the first part I definitely agree that they have a great cultural understanding to each other, and that's what's missing, clearly missing between, say, Obama and Putin, because there is no understanding and no knowledge on both sides. Obama doesn't know anything about America, he doesn't understand this country. I'm sorry, Putin doesn't know anything about the United States, Obama doesn't know much about Russia, I understand that. But this being said, I don't think there's been much achieved, and I don't think that capital of cultural understanding has been politically implemented. Because, Putin has achieved everything he needed to achieve in Ukraine, and I don't think his plan was ever to invade Poland or Bulgaria or Baltic states. So whatever he wanted to achieve, he pretty much achieved it. And today, particularly with the war in Syria, he even achieved the fact that his involvement in Ukraine is pretty much considered second-rate news today.
Thank you. I think we all agree that Putin wants to make Russia great again, make it another superpower, another great power on the world. But does he have an overall strategy for that, or is that just an objective he wants to achieve by various ways and means as they present themselves?
Well, in the beginning he didn't. Clearly he didn't have it in 2001 and 2005, but I think it's gradually emerging. And for example, the concept of the Russian world, the so-called Ruski Mir, that's a new concept, and it's a geopolitical, cultural concept where he says that I will protect the Russian people in the former Soviet Union, in the countries of the former Soviet Union. So that's a policy, that's a vision. And the vision is also to reestablish Russia's geopolitical influence worldwide, to become equal in every sense with the United States and China. It's very interesting that when Obama was elected, I think soon after he was elected, he somewhere said a sentence that Russia is a regional power. No one absolutely paid any attention to that in the Western media. Russian media exploded. They took it as an absolute deadly insult. It was almost compared that United States is ready to conquer Russia. So his plan, strategic plan, to bring this old imperial power to Russia.
What is your assessment? Is there an overall strategy Vladimir Putin pursues?
It's difficult to say. He has goals, yes. If there is a big plan behind that, I'm not sure. Yeah. The interesting point is that Russians believe that there is a majority of the Russians, I think, believe that the Americans have a big plan behind it to keep Russia down.
Right.
And to divide the Europeans from Russia, yeah, and to stop getting closer, yeah, that's. But as a historian, I hardly will give you an answer. We can talk about this in 30 years from now.
You certainly right now don't have the documentary evidence. But when you look at what Putin is doing in foreign policy, the Crimea annexation, the activities in eastern Ukraine, now the bombing in Syria and other activities, that all cost an awful lot of money. Can Russia actually afford it?
Well, that's a very good question, because it cannot. But the question, how far the Russian people are ready to suffer. And that's why he needs so much nationalist rhetoric today, through media outlets, through newspapers, through TV. History shows that the Russian people are in fact extremely tolerant. But it also shows that there is a boiling point. And when the boiling point is reached, you can get another 1917. And that's going to be bloody and horrible. So, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Final question about the Russian-Chinese relationship. There has been a realignment recently. Is that something for the future, or is that very temporary? How would you assess that?
In fact, I'm very skeptical about the Russian-Chinese relation. If someone wanted me to predict a future conflict, like I would say that the war between the United States and Russia is impossible, period. It never happened and it will not happen. Like, it's not very likely that it will ever happen between Russia and China, but it's more likely because there are competing geopolitical interests in Central Asia over Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. There are interests clearly in the Far East and Siberia. And if you look at the history of relations between China and Russia, they were actually quite complicated. During the communist years, China and Russia were enemies, even though for a long period of time. And today, the whole story that Putin portrays China as the best friend of Russia, and on the 9th of May, for the 70th anniversary, the person who is sitting next to him is the president of China, to me is a little bit funny and a little bit naive on the side of the Russian side, or on the part of the Russian government. Chinese are going to betray Russia if it's in their national interest. And they're an economically booming country. They're not going to sacrifice their relations with the United States, with EU, and with other parts of the world for the friendship with Russia. And the best sign of that when Russia is now under sanctions and they cannot borrow money in Europe and the United States for extended periods of time, they were hoping that Chinese would help. Chinese didn't. They refused.
What is your assessment?
For the future, just have in mind what is Russia, the population of Russia and the population of China, and where China will go to. So everything will depend on China and not on Russia. I'm skeptical about a permanent success for Russia, at least for the time being. It's the only possibility for Russia where to go to, yeah, if the doors to Europe or to the US are closed. So the Chinese do it from their point of view very, how to say in English, very tough. How they appreciate Russian politicians and how they succeed in Schwärmen,
to flatter Russia?
Yeah, to get them on their side. So Russians are getting convinced, yeah, that beloved by the Chinese, yeah, and this secures a good cooperation for the future. But in reality, how it will develop, that's another question.
Thank you. President Obama will step down in January 2017. Is Vladimir Putin in Russia forever?
Well, the next election in 2018, I believe by constitution, can be re-elected for another 6 years. Unless something really drastic happens, in 2018 he will be elected. Whether like re-elected with something like 85%. And the big question in 2024, of course, very difficult to predict, still many years, but he will still be a young man, and he doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, he has a very healthy lifestyle, so very likely, but to do that, they will either need to amend the constitution, or again, there will be a story like with Medvedev for a short period of time. It's a good question. But I think that by that time he'll probably try to find a successor for himself.
Well, he will be well into his 60s, so young as a relative, I think. What is your assessment?
That's too far. Until 2023, 24, I think everything is predicted.
To expect, yeah.
To expect, yeah. What then? It's in 10 years.
We don't know yet. Thank you very much, Peter Ruggenthaler, Peter Eltsov. Thank you very much for your insights tonight.